I usually have two or three things that I knit together, and they come at different times. And then I get that aha moment of, oh, these all belong in the same story. Now, how do I make that happen?
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To. Our guest today is Anne Hood, and we are going to be talking about her latest book, The Stolen Child, which I am absolutely in love with. It's a Book Reporter Bets On selection. I finished reading it, and I said, this book is just fabulous. Can't wait for people to read it.
Thank you, Carol.
Now, I'm doing this interview before our review runs, so I'm going to quote a couple of other people about this. First of all, Kirkus said in a starred review, which is a very big deal, The Stolen Child is compelling, skillfully told, and meticulously structured, a well-crafted, fast-paced story about how a single encounter, love that, can shape a person's whole life. And Adrian Bedore, who we've had on this show, said, vividly peopled, I love that word, intricately plotted and gorgeously written. The Stolen Child is one of those all-consuming and big-hearted novels that explores what it means to be human, how to love, accept loss, transcend failures, and become the person you are meant to be. Reading Anne Hood is like setting out on an adventure with a wise and trusted friend you never wanted to end. And I think that sums it up beautifully. I just love both those quotes. And with that introduction, welcome, Anne. So nice to have you here.
Thank you. So good to be here. I'm so glad you liked the book.
Just really loved it. Loved it. So let's start with you telling us a bit about The Stolen Child.
So The Stolen Child follows the journey of a man named Nick Burns, who during World War I, as a battle was beginning, was handed a baby and some small paintings by a woman with whom he had bonded. He was in a trench on her farm in France, and he was told, save them. And it's a life or death decision, because how do you save a baby in a war, in a battle? And he made a decision, and he lived with it for the rest of his life. He regretted it. It really did kind of ruin his life. He didn't want to have children after that. It was hard for him to love and to be a husband to his wife. So he's now at the end of his life. It's the early 1970s, and he finds out that he's ill. And he decides that before he gets too ill to travel, he is going to go and unravel the mystery of what happened to that baby. And he hires Jenny, a young woman with, I always describe her as with moxie, who had big dreams for herself and got derailed in college. And the two of them, this unlikely couple, he's kind of a cantankerous, grumpy old guy, and she's got stars in her eyes and is finally getting to Europe, which has been her dream. The two of them set out to solve the mystery of the stolen child.
Yeah, and it can't be two more different people. He'd been to Harvard, she hasn't finished college. Like the whole thing is just, and he is grumpy. And I haven't cast. We'll get that later on, but I have definitely got cast. I've definitely got cast. Now, I understand your son shares your interest in World War I. And what has that been like for the two of you? Have you traveled there? What have you done that really infused the story? Because so many books are about World War II, but
I know.
Why World War I?
You know, it's so funny. I've been wondering this as I've been thinking about this book and talking to people about it. Maybe partially it's because I grew up with my uncles and my neighbors, all World War II vets, right, in the 60s. And I was the kid who always wanted to be different. And I must have latched onto the other war that no one was talking about anymore. I remember reading Johnny Got His Gun, which is a World War I anti-war book, and seeing All Quiet on the Western Front when I was kind of young, maybe junior high age. And I became very fascinated by that war and passed on that fascination, as we do, to my son, who took it and, of course, made it his own and went even deeper. And who one day called me all excited. They'd found this Instagram account of a photographer for National Geographic who had discovered that many of the trenches in France had art carved, drawn, and painted into the walls by the soldiers who were down there. And the Instagram account has so many pictures of trench art. So I immediately wrote to the photographer and said, my son and I would like to come and see the art. And he's like, no, actually, we can't do that. They're very fragile. And the art itself is fragile. So he photographs it really as a way to preserve it, but you can't see it.
Okay.
However, for my son's 30th birthday last year, we went to Sarajevo to stand in the footsteps of Gavril Princip, who is the assassin of Archduke Ferdinand and his wife, thus starting World War One. And the two of us went, and we also went to the battlefield in Gallipoli in Turkey. So, yep, we love it. We're
You
passionate.
love it. You love it.
Yeah.
It's like, no Omaha Beach for her. She's going deeper. We're going deeper into what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there is not, I haven't seen as many books. I mean, World War II, you could just, read for like, years and days and whatever, years and decades. But so much of what was shaped happened during World War One.
Yeah.
And why we got to World War II, and yes, okay, Carol, you're not dumb. Like that's exactly what happened. But it's what could have changed there at that time that could have changed the whole course of history. Like what during that war could have made big differences.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there are so many points where it could have been so different, including that assassination that started it.
Mm-hmm.
There had been two unsuccessful assassination attempts that day. And because of that, they rerouted the Duke in his car. And Gavril Princip stopped for a sandwich, and he was coming out of a sandwich shop as the Duke's, manservant was going into the sandwich shop. He says, "Oh my goodness, here's the Duke," and he was able to assassinate him right there. The attempts had failed that day. It was pure coincidence. So starting right at the beginning, there were so many weird sort of things like that.
Yeah. We watch a lot of shows about World War II. We've watched Masters of the Air. We're watching now We Were the Lucky Ones.
Yes.
And there's just so much in those stories. And the stories about World War One, I think that it personally, okay, we remember World War II because our fathers or uncles or whoever had served there. And, you understand those kinds of stories. But it was just like, as you look back, what was different there? It was the paintings in the bunkers. It was where you were in those trenches. It's who was fighting whom at the time.
Right. That's right.
Changed.
And it was the incredible loss of that war.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I went to London in 2014. It was the 100th anniversary. And they had commissioned an artist to make ceramic poppies, one for every British citizen who died in that war. Mm-hmm. And there were like 1 million poppies. There were so many. And they filled the Tower of London moat. It was so spectacular.
Right.
But it was, and also beautiful poets came out of that time, right? Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen, Joyce Kilmer, Rupert, I'm losing his last name, but poets were brought into that war. Tolkien was, his entire battalion, which was made up of 5 of his best friends, were all killed. He was the only survivor. Wow. And that's how he created Lord of the Rings. It was the vision of what he saw on the battlefield that made that land.
Oh, wow. I never knew that.
So there's great literary influences and references to that war. And I'm sure there are for World War II. I just don't know about them, but not just books written about it, but the people who served.
Yeah. The references, what's going on, where power changed, where power changed hands so quickly, where it was the right to fight, but also the right to defend. Both were happening at the same time. Right. And it was, I don't know.
Use of airplanes for the first time in a war.
Yes. And then where that went from there, because you're seeing, the bombers come in differently towards the end of World War II. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about destruction, because there's so much that is just leveled and things that are just never the same. Like you go back to your village and your village doesn't exist. It's where did these people go? Where did this woman go after she handed him the child? And that's one of the big questions within the book. And what I really love for anybody who's going to read this is there's so many questions that come up, and they're all answered. And they're all answered as time goes on. They're not loose threads, but there are a lot of threads. Anne and I both love to knit. So we're saying,
I was going to say, you know why?
We knit really well in the books. We don't do any of what I call reverse knitting. We're always doing really good knitting in the books.
Exactly. In fact, Carol, I wrote about, it's called Knitting a Novel. For Modern Daily Knitting, they have their newsletter, and it's coming out this week.
Oh,
about how knitting a temperature blanket helped me figure out how to knit all the threads together in this novel.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy of it.
Oh, please do. Please do. I'll definitely share with our readers too. Yeah, the temperature. I've always wanted to do the temperature blanket, but I decided to do it in March. It's like, well, what was the temperature that day? Like, can I go back and look? It doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. So where did you come up with the idea for the book? Like, where did you come up with that I've got this curmudgeonly guy and the girl, and they're gonna go and they're gonna go find the baby in the painting, and what happened?
So, I think for all my novels, as you know, I usually have two or three things that I knit together, and
Mhm.
they come at different times. And then I get that aha moment of, oh, these all belong in the same story. Now, how do I make that happen? And so the real beginning was the Museum of Tears,
Mhm.
which is a storyline in the book of this kind of overly romantic, maybe hapless guy in Naples, Italy, starting in the 1930s. And we follow him as we follow Nick all the way into the 70s.
Mhm.
And he's very inept around women. And one day he comes upon a woman crying in a park and he doesn't know how to comfort her. He's young. Turns out she's a famous opera singer who he recognizes, but all he has is empty vials that he's taking to get filled with paint. And so he collects her tears, which makes her cry more because she thinks it's so weird. And then he preserves them. He
Mhm.
puts the date and her name and that she was crying from a broken heart.
Mhm.
And he begins collecting people's tears. And that actually was the story that started this.
Right.
Because one day I was feeling kind of blue and I was a little weepy. And I had this thought, I wonder how many tears I've cried in my life.
Mhm.
And going back to when I was little and my mother used to play Big Girls Don't Cry by the Four Seasons because I was such a crybaby. So when
Oh,
she'd play that, like you're a big girl and you shouldn't cry, all the way back there up until now. And I thought, gee, I wish I had collected them and like written down so I could remember the silly things I used to cry
yeah,
over, or
yeah.
see take a look into my younger self, what used to make me cry. And then what would I do with them? I'd put them in a museum, and that idea just tickled me. And the next thought was a character is going to do that. And the Museum of Tears was born that day.
We have so many things that weave into our lives. My uncle was one of the Four Seasons who sang Big Girls Don't
But
Cry.
stop. You're
My uncle was
kidding.
Nick Massey from the Four Seasons and the one that's on Way Down Low. So yeah,
You're, oh, so he's in Jersey Boys. I mean, not really,
he's in
but
Jersey Boys. He's the one that left. He's the one that left the group in
my,
Jersey Boys. Isn't that
wow.
crazy though? Yep.
Okay, that's
And
crazy.
it's, I think the second time somebody's up a reference to the Four Seasons recently. And I was just there like,
That's
this is like,
funny.
I think Kristen Hanna had something. And I was like, Kristen, that's like really, she said, I know you for like 20 something years. I never knew that reference. Yeah.
That well, your uncle used to sing to me when I cried. No,
There you go. Big girls don't cry. You know, that's the way it goes. That's the way it goes. So talk to us about Nick. Because, oh man, is he curmudgeonly? Oh my gosh. And there's, wartime Nick, and then there's later Nick, because Nick doesn't go in like that. He comes home a different person.
that's right. As we know, soldiers did from every war that happens.
Mhm.
I wanted him to be a guy who had everything. He's kind of cocky. He's a star with crew. He goes to Harvard. He's got the world sort of, by what's the saying, by a string.
Girl by a string. Yeah,
Yeah, this sounds
girl by a
wrong, but
string.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got everything. He's trying to decide which of the many women he dates he's going to marry. I mean, he's handsome. He's described as kind of barrel chested and cocky. And the war, what he saw in the war, and the decision he made concerning the baby, just changed him forever in a way that made him not generous, um, cranky, always questioning himself, unable to keep a job. Here he
Mhm.
was, he had his pick of jobs, unable to really go forward because he's always offending people.
Mhm.
Um, but Jenny, when he meets Jenny and they're on their trip, as much as she kind of bothers him because she's so optimistic and starry-eyed, she makes him crack finally.
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
that one day he buys her the earrings? Not a spoiler really, but he buys her those earrings, and that's when I thought he had found a piece of himself again.
Yeah. It's like, I'm ready to give again. I kept thinking of Nick looking like Griffin Dunn in the role that he had in This Is Us.
I
That rough,
I love that.
think about it. So he comes back, he's come back from the war. This is the way he feels. And I just thought that was the image I had in my head of growling all the time. Like it's not the uncle you're going to ever choose to be with. Like it's
No, no,
you
no.
have to invite them, but it's going to be bad. Like
Yeah,
it's going to be bad.
that's right.
And it's just that was just such an edge to him, like the whole way of what's going on. And I love that when he does his ad for assistant, it says so much about him. It's girl/assistant, period. Must not talk much, period. Must stay out of the way, period. Must be organized, period. Must get things done, period. Must be free to travel, period. Must have passport, period. Smoking, okay. And then adds, hurry. And this is not the first ad he writes, because we get to see all the ones he writes along the way, because he self-edits really, really, really well. So
Yeah.
was that you self-editing you, or were you just giving him more as time went on?
I was really imagining that that is what he would do and what he would say. And the smoking thing, I was like, he needs one more thing that's a little more like, okay, I'm not that bad. And
Right.
what is a thing that would be okay? Okay, smoking. You could smoke. I don't know. Just
And then Jenny is reading this. Jenny's working in a diner. She's like, she's had to leave college for a reason that we don't want to spoil any of this.
right, right.
So Jenny's working in this diner, nothing is going right. And she reads the ad, and the one thing she reads and says, I don't smoke. So it makes it even funnier when she sits and's got this line that, and I don't smoke. Like, other than that, I'm really good, so it was like really great. So tell us about Jenny, because we've got her picked as the stars in her eyes kind of person. And she
Yeah.
really does. She's optimistic about life, no matter what's been thrown her way. And a lot has already come her way.
Yes.
And how much fun did you have creating Jenny?
So, Jenny is partially because of mathematics. So if Nick was in that trench in 1918 and he's now at the end of his life, it landed right in the mid 70s so that he still can travel and he's young enough but old enough to be that sick. So it was really math. But boy, was I happy, because that's my sweet spot. That's
Right.
when I was in college.
Right.
So I could use, so Jenny, who is nothing like me except that undying optimism that used to drive some people crazy. I had that.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting to see the big world, I had that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jenny, I was most likely to succeed in my high school. But I did think about, well, what if I had gotten derailed?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to use all those true things that I experienced and then do that thing, what if, I think, which is what is at the heart of novels, something real. And then you ask, but what if this?
Yes.
And so she gets derailed and she doesn't even really know how to fix her life, but she keeps going to this travel agency. She works at an IHOP near Brown University. She watches the young women and young men come in after having been to a dance or a party, and the guys are drunk, and she gets teased, and she watches them with incredible, real jealousy,
Mm-hmm.
but also kind of aspirationally.
Right.
Like, somehow I've got to be sitting on the other side of this booth.
Right. And are any of these men going to be right for me? And she looks
Right.
at everybody as she also has a woman that she befriended when she was in school named Vera. That's going to
Yeah.
have a really big impact on her life in a lot of ways, because that was the woman she thought she wanted to be.
That's
And
right.
I think you do a really good job there of talking about the people that you idolize when you're in high school or college, the
Yeah.
people that you say they've got it all. And one year, one of my sons was having some trouble with this kid in his class. And he goes, don't worry, I think he's peaking in the fourth grade. And I just burst out
There
laughing.
are those people, right?
I was like, fourth grade, huh? And he's like, fourth grade, mom. I think that's it. That's a height of popularity. From here on in, it's going to downhill.
I love it.
And I just love when you sit there and you can look back. And if you're in the moment and you can have that moment, good for you.
Yeah.
Most of us are not. We're in
Right.
that moment and we're seeing somebody else being better or smarter or
Right.
more entitled or more whatever. And it's like, oh, if I could just be. And then you're like,
Yeah, what I like on Jenny's journey, she even goes to tell Vera that she's got this job and is going to Europe because she wants Vera's approval, because she wants to be Vera or like Vera. And as the world opens up for Jenny, Vera starts to seem more and more ridiculous to her.
mm-hmm.
And I really like that, because I believe that that is true, that when we're in the world and we're engaging in the world and we're seeing new things and we're meeting new people and our mind is blown, expanding and blown,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you do see things differently. And I loved that sort of trajectory for her finding herself.
And that's a whole book club discussion right there, folks. where you've looked at different people at different times in your life. And I could sit down and write a whole book about people that I've either admired, thought, oh, if I was them, if I had moved there, if I had done
Yes,
this,
made
done
that
that.
choice. Yeah.
And then you look later years and you're like, not so sure, not so
Right.
sure of like,
Right.
what we wanted to happen. She spends a lot of time, wanting to be somebody else. But by the same token, she's got this inner core to her that is going to come out. There's this
Yeah.
inner core that's, sort of been chafed, but it's going to get buffed back up. So let's switch and talk about Camille Chastain, who's the artist, the mother. She's the woman who did the paintings, the woman about which we know so little. But so much of the book is powered by what Camille did.
Yeah.
Camille's choices, Camille's art, everything that she made. And when I watch, I'm always even more so when I read books about the war. I think about how little is known about those who died. Okay.
Yeah.
We know numbers of people who died, but the
Yeah.
stories of the people who died. And I think that that's the reason I found myself thinking so much about Nick's Search, because you watch a show, and I watch a lot of shows, especially about World War II, and the entire town is annihilated, or just one side of the street. And what about the other people? I mean, even
Right.
earthquake or whatever. And
Right.
I think that there's, so much there that I was thinking about it during Nick's Search, because who are these people and who was she that he knew that much about?
Yes. Yeah. So she was born way before I started this novel, believe it or not. When I was in, it was probably, oh wow, 10 years ago or more. I was in Paris for several weeks and in the Museum d'Orsay. And it struck me that no women were represented. And that is my favorite museum. And I love that Impressionist art and the building itself is so beautiful. But I'm like, there must have been women painting
Right.
at the same time. And then there was some Mary Cassette, we found some, I found a few. And then I went into this gallery in the museum and there was these really realistic, rough, really showing dirt and sweat farm paintings.
Huh.
A cow, but like the mud and the animals are dirty. And they just caught my attention. I looked at when a woman had painted them.
Mm.
Rose Bonheur. And I bought like a postcard of that cow painting
Right.
and I had it by my desk. And I was like, somehow this is speaking to me. And I don't know why, and I don't know how. And so this Camille is not that artist, but she wanted to be that artist.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she paints on very small canvases because it's the war, and she had to cut up the canvas that she had. She doesn't want the life of a farm wife. She doesn't want a baby. She doesn't want to be a mother. She wants to go to Paris and be an artist. And
Mm-hmm.
she's actually very good. She's very dismissive of what Nick is drawing in the trench. She says his perspective is wrong, and why is that woman got an umbrella? And she's very dismissive. But she wants to save herself, really.
Mm-hmm.
When push comes to shove, when the Germans are approaching, that's what she does.
Yeah.
She runs. Yeah.
I'm gonna go get myself. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. And here's the baby. Take care of the baby. Because
Yeah.
going with the baby, she's gonna die. It's
That's right.
never gonna make it. And
That's
that's
right.
what I'm thinking is, how many lines of people? Like, okay, we hear about a lot of people that were exterminated in the camps. We hear about this. The people that just were walking down the street when the bombs strafed down. What happened? Who were they?
Exactly. Exactly. And those decisions that we've been talking about. My husband has a story about a family who they knew to leave Austria in the 30s.
Mm,
And one uncle said, I'll meet you because my tuxedo is going to be ready and I have to pick it up because obviously we'll leave and come back. And of course, he never got out.
right.
One decision that
Hmm.
seems so kind of small.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm gonna go get the tuxedo. And
Right.
there's the change. My mother-in-law was in Germany. She was born here. Her parents were here, and her father thought he had more opportunity in Germany, so he moved her, her mother, and
No.
the three of them went to Germany, and they were there, and it was like 1939, and
Oh,
he said, "I do not like the way this looks. I think we need to leave," and they left. And her younger brother had been born at that point, and Greg, when she passed away, a lot of Greg is my son, is I think you met him, is very into history, very
right.
into history. And they gave him everything. And he has the passport that they came back on with the +1 for the child and the Nazi stamp on it.
I have the chills. Are you
And
kidding?
he said it was how the lives could have been different and how things could have
Exactly.
changed. And
Exactly.
he's got this the original trunk that the grandmother came over from Germany with. He has with all the stickers on it and everything from through the and
Unbelievable.
sitting and looking things up. And a lot of times people look up like how did the family come over? Like how they go
Yeah.
about the number of stowaways there were. Like
Mm.
there is no record of you on any ship at all when you go back and look. And what was that? It was hiding.
Yeah. I mean, Carol, what you're talking about are the untold stories, right? The
Yes.
lost stories. And I think part of this book, part of what I was doing was trying to give a voice to those stories.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I felt. That's what I felt. I felt like
Yeah.
these are the people who she handed him the baby, she handed him the painting, and she was gone. It's like she
Yeah.
was etherized. Like, where did she go? And he doesn't know, did she live through that battle? Did she
Right.
go to the next town? And what happened to that baby that he made a choice, and was that the correct choice?
Right.
And the whole thing revolves around that. So,
Right.
I think that the challenges of setting a book in the 70s, we lived through it, but there's stuff to do with memory. Like what did you really do then? What really happens?
I have to tell you something. I swear that I was frozen in like 1972. I can remember like what I wore when I worked at Jordan Marsh. The night I met a guy who I got a crush on, I had on, white jeans and a red poor boy shirt and red Dr. Scholl's. Like I still remember that.
Right.
So I was frozen as a teenager. So of all the times that I can go back, now ask me things about like earlier or like a certain point in college, like maybe when I turned 20 and left my teen years, not so much.
There's that.
I just remember the music sitting in my room playing Simon and Garfunkel over and over. My father just like wanting to like lose his mind if he had to hear that song one more time. I just remember it so clearly.
Well, we kind of bond over Simon and Garfunkel too. Huge, huge Paul Simon fan.
Oh
Huge, huge,
yeah.
huge, huge. I mean, stood in that. I said to the last concert he did, which was out in Queens. We didn't sit on the blanket. I said to my son, said, let's go up to the front. So there I am of a certain age up in the front.
I
And
love it.
if you leave, like somebody takes your spot. And I was
Yeah.
like, well, I was kind of like in the mosh pit of Paul Simon. at a
That's funny.
certain at a certain age, like doing this.
I'd be with you. I get
But
it.
playing the albums over and over, and then you had to get up and flip it to hear the other
Yeah.
side. And there was no like when headphones were invented, my parents were thrilled because I didn't have to hear it. But I do remember they played Bridge Over Troubled Water for the first time. It was like 1969. And they were doing this show that was very controversial. It came out November 30th. We'll never forget it. And we're listening. My mother goes, that song's going to be a hit. I was just like,
Your mother was a wise woman.
go mom, go mom. And it was, but you remember the excitement of finding the album, and everything was just, it was not as available. Not,
Yeah.
I think I was thinking of that with Jenny.
Yeah.
Everything was not, you could
It's
get it in
work
5
harder.
minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about that in the simple act of her getting a passport,
Yes, yes.
right? And not knowing how, and you can't Google it.
No.
So she went to a travel agency. I don't even know if there are still travel agencies, at least not brick and mortar ones, right?
No.
And I grew up in Rhode Island, but not in Providence. It was a big thing for my cousin and me to take the bus to Providence. It was 25 cents. And we would take the bus and we would walk around Brown and this Thayer Street, which is sort of like the heartbeat of Brown University. And I remembered every store. I mean, I did my research and made sure, yeah, that theater was there and that bookstore was there. And that I had it down. I remembered that
Yes.
IHOP, I mean, that was a real thing. I looked up like what was the the French movie playing, and those little details to help me with my descriptions. But I had that down in my memory. So funny.
And we were places. We had to get from point A to point B. There was no map to get you there. You had to pay more attention to
Yeah.
the store you were going to make the left turn on or where this was going to be. And it wasn't like the turnover of buildings the way it is now, too. Those stores were there. They were
They
like
were there.
vested there. You were
Yeah.
going to go to Haynes or Warden Taylor or whatever you're going to go, and it wasn't
Right.
going to move.
Right.
It was a very different time, and it was a time where things were simpler and crazier at the same time.
Right.
That's
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but I mean, the social unrest, the campus
Mhm.
protest, that was all part of, I was too young to be a part of it,
Mhm.
but we grew up watching that seeing it on television. My older brother was definitely involved in that
Mhm.
stuff. He graduated from high school in 1969. So there was a lot going on politically, the
Yeah.
assassinations and it was and Watergate. I mean, it was rich in every possible way.
Well, a couple of my friends from grammar school were talking about, we were doing a debate, and who was I? Was I Richard Nixon or somebody else? And it was really funny because you remember those moments because there was not a lot of other stuff clouding it. Like you went to school, you did this, you did that. You weren't on
Yeah,
social media looking up stuff all day long.
right, right.
If I had any questions today, as I was doing this, I was able to look something up really fast. Like, oh, here, what does this look like? You know, it wasn't
Right.
there. So I've read that you like doing crossword puzzles, and I know that you love really crossword puzzles. When you're working on a book, is it like filling in the puzzle to get all the work?
I would say that it's more like a jigsaw puzzle,
Okay.
which I
Hmm.
also love. Because I have the frame and I have pieces that I know I can fit together,
Hmm.
but I have to keep trying. Does it fit here? Does it fit here? And I actually, I take a big piece of poster board and I make a lot of notes and charts and timelines. And I look at it a lot until I really start writing. And then I put all that stuff away. And then because I need to figure out how the puzzle works.
Right. You need to say, how am I going to get there? How am I going to get
Yeah.
down that road? How am I going to? So on
How
this
does this
book,
fit into this? Like,
so are you a big plotter in advance, or do you just know your story, like what you want to say?
this is so interesting. I think it was my fourth novel. It was back in like 1992 or something. And my Kirkus review said, "This happens, that happens. So what?" And I was like, "Oh, that's bad." So it wasn't my first book. So, after the sting faded, I thought about it and I said, "Yeah, so what? I don't have a plot."
Mhm.
And I determined that I was going to figure out how to write plot. So I spent the next year reading mysteries, detective stories,
Mhm.
because they know how to do it.
Right.
And I took a couple screenwriting classes because they know how to do it.
Mhm.
And my next novel, all the reviews talked about the fast moving plot.
And that's here too. This is here too. We're moving through countries, people. We're moving through
Countries,
cities,
decades.
decades, cities. We're having great dinners. Oh, and we're falling in love. We're falling in love. Like a lot of love happens throughout this as well,
Yeah.
and that's another beautiful part of it as well. There's small things like we're talking about Paul Simon, the use of the line from Dangling Conversation. I feel
Yeah.
like this whole book is a dangling conversation.
I love that.
The whole book is
Oh,
my baby. And then what happens? And then it's, what did I do? And then what happens? And then
yeah.
it's, I'm going to follow this guy and go to Europe. And what happens? So the
Yeah.
whole thing, I feel like, is this, the conversation starts, and then where we're going to go with it. And where we're going to go is what you are driving the story, but it's a dangling conversation.
I love that.
You like
Using
that?
Simon and Garfunkel reference, you had me at Simon and Garfunkel. Yeah.
I just saw him in the Garfunkel. And look, and Jenny looked like the star of The Graduate. I mean, Elaine.
I know. I tried not to like have people look like movie stars, but it was such of the time, that
Right.
movie. And I wanted her to actually be kind of a looker, and not being aware of how pretty she actually is. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's because she felt unpretty at some point. She was made to
exactly.
feel unpretty at some
Yeah.
point. And I always think that of plastics with that book. And
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm swimming in the pool, I come out of the pool and I go, I felt like Benjamin today. I said, I just gotta tell you, I had no idea. So I went in the pool like Benjamin to see what I could figure out for my life. It's
Totally.
like so funny.
So
You
many
know,
lines from that movie I still quote.
there are so many great lines. There was this special about Paul Simon in Restless Dreams that I thought was,
I watched it. It was wonderful.
and MJ, I think the one thing they missed was the whole last arc of Africa.
Yeah.
And I don't think they did enough of Africa, and then down with Brazil. I just think that
Brazil. Yeah.
we glossed over that because we were trying to fill the theme of the overarching thing of Psalms. But I feel like those were such huge moments
My
in there in his work and in his career. But like I feel like we glossed over. But by the same token, when you're sitting and watching that and you're realizing inspiration and you're in a studio and you're watching, and I was thinking about people being writers as that moment where his director, not for anybody who's not watched it, I'll give this to you.
Yeah.
Roy Halley is figuring out how to make the music move like this. And you think about the producer that's working, which is sort of like the author, like trying to produce what's going on, but make the sound right and make it different.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
If that
Exactly.
means doing a drum in the elevator shaft
You
or
bring it right. Exactly. Exactly.
and what you realize is a lot of times the genius is not just what was written or sung by the songwriter, it's that producer, that what running those tracks together,
Yeah.
trying all these crazy things to sit there and make it work.
You know, we just saw the play Stereophonic last night. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's loosely based on Fleetwood Mac.
Uh-huh.
And that's what one of the things I left the play with was that record producer was really the one who was making the record.
Yes.
He was, in a way, the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Or if not the protagonist, the guy pulling all the strings.
It was okay. You got all these ideas, and as they're hearing the ideas, they're doing this. And what I feel like is you're sitting hearing all your characters' ideas, and you're hearing who Jenny is, and you're hearing who everybody is, and how you're going to have to move them around to make it. So the author doesn't have somebody who's the producer; they're the producer as well as the director and everything.
Although the editor likes to weigh in.
Yeah, and then the agent, when I say the editor, later, come in, and they're like,
I do all the work, and then they have a couple ideas.
They're like, you went a little too deep here. Let's pull that back. Like can we cut a city? Like, can we cut like like a compress? I like when they sit there and say, "You already said this."
Yeah, right.
It's news to me. Okay, so let's see. We've got this quote: "For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand." And this is from William Butler Yeats' poem, The Stolen Child. Was that always the title of this book?
Oh, no, it was the Museum of Tears.
Oh.
It was the Museum of Tears from the minute I invented that guy in Italy. That the day I was crying and thought of that. I'm going to write a book called The Museum of Tears. That's what the file is still called on my computer. And it had been accepted, copy edited. And I got an email that said something like, "Sit down, you're not going to like this email." I thought, oh dear, they're not publishing the book. What happened? And it was that marketing and publicity felt the Museum of Tears was a very weak title. And one of their reasons, which is one of the reasons I capitulated, I thought it made sense because I resisted.
Always.
Yeah. Was there were 3 books coming out in a 1-year period, the Museum of something.
Yes. Yes.
And they said, do you want a reader to go into a bookstore and say, I want that book, the Museum of, and buy the other person's book?
True.
Having worked in a bookstore, I know that a lot of readers do come in just a vague image of a title or a cover.
Yeah.
And I thought, I do want it to stand out. And I want to be the third museum,
Yeah.
And so it kind of convinced me. As soon as I was on board with that, the title was obvious because that was the only other title I could imagine.
Right. And it's just perfect because the child drives everything that happens right from the beginning when she drops the baby to everything that goes on for the rest of the story.
That's right.
Every single thing and where it ends up and whatever. So the cover is also terrific. And let's get this to come clear. Oh, there's clear. Yeah. Was this the first cover?
No, the first cover looked like it was a real estate ad for a Tuscan villa or something. I said, this isn't my book.
Right.
And so they went back and what they came up with after that was, I think this is gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
And I love like the yellow paint smear in the corner on the bottom.
Yes.
Like it looks like a painter's brush stroke, and the poppies represent World War I. There's a lot going on. Plus it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I think it was like really, really. Now, how about the audio? Jefferson Mays is the narrator. Did you select him?
I am on the moon. So they send me like 5 names or 4 names and I'm reading them and like a little sample, but I hadn't played any of the samples. I land on Jefferson Mays. Like I am one of his biggest fans. My son and I saw I Am My Own Wife off Broadway. He won, and then I think he went on Broadway and he won a Tony for it. I am like, I can't believe it'd be like somebody else being excited about Meryl Streep. Like I am so excited about this.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Oh, how perfect.
Yeah.
How
Perfect.
perfect. Have you gotten to hear it yet? Have you heard the audio?
No, I don't even know where it is. I do know that he had a version of a Christmas Carol that he did every part. So I just know he's going to nail this.
I can't wait to hear.
Right?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear. So what's next? Do you have a project?
Oh, okay. I have two projects. The
Ooh, two.
first one is coming out in November,
Really?
and
Wow.
it's an anthology of writers writing about Gilmore Girls.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
And I have fantastic writers, Joanna Rakoff. I can't even think of her, but she just popped in my mind. But I am so excited about it because I am a Gilmore Girls fanatic, and I know a lot of people are. So it's kind of about mothers and daughters, really. I mean,
Yeah,
at heart.
that's right. Yeah.
And then I'm working on a new novel. I'm in the trenches to get back to World
Which
War One with
literally.
that. Yeah, so I'm just hoping by the end of summer to have something I can show people of that
Okay.
novel.
What do you do? Okay, so when you get to what point do you show people? At what point?
So
Good
I
rough draft?
I show my agent at about 50 to 75 pages because if she's like, no, I'm not going to keep going, even if I love the idea, I'm going to listen to why it's a no. And we've gotten past that. I'm 200 or 220 pages in and hoping to finish by the end of summer. My husband reads more drafts than a human should have to read.
Oh, that's yeah. Could you read this? Can you just tell me what you think? Is
Yeah,
this
just the
good? Is this
chapter, the new chapter, the this, that. Yeah.
yeah. And it's somebody reading along the way that knows you and also can sit there and say, have really good criticism of what's going on,
Exactly.
can
Yeah.
really give you the tough feedback that you need at a
That you
particular
need.
time.
Right.
Yeah.
That you need.
And sometimes I can just sit there and say to people, and they're yesing me. And years ago when we started the company, somebody had done an ad down at one of the big publishers, and I thought it was terrible in the New York Times. And I called somebody and I said, "This ad is terrible. I really do." And I told them why. The
Yeah.
director, and it said, Carol, I'm going to go into the meeting, and I'm going to bring up, you really got good points here. I'm going to bring them up. And this is great. Walked into the meeting, and the publisher held the ad because, "Isn't this the best ad we ever did?" And I learned something from that. And when I walk in a room, I go, is this a good idea or a bad idea? And
Oh,
in, because if you say this is a great idea, nobody's going to give you your feedback. So instead,
right.
so
Right.
it becomes a different kind of a story. If you're sitting there really looking, sometimes you sit there and go, isn't this good? No,
Yeah,
that's not a way to do it.
that's not the way to do it. I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. And too much of it is, oh, isn't this great? And I'm like, well, and then you can't feel like you can't say anything,
Yeah, actually not so great. That's not a thing you say. So
Yeah. We're both Sagittarius, we'd probably say it anyway.
I think we would actually. Who are we kidding?
Kidding. Of course we're gonna say it. And it is so good to see you. I've been looking forward to this interview since, well, no, actually probably since the last time I saw you.
Yeah.
With a lunch where we were absolutely having this conversation about knitting.
That's
In
right.
the beginning, in the middle between us was a very famous journalist who was watching us like he was at a ping pong match. Okay. And I ripped this out and I did this and I did, and he finally turned to us out of sheer, I have no participation in the conversation, and said, "I have a sweater with a hole in it that I'd like to be able to figure out what to fix. Can I bring it to you?" And the two of us just sat there and looked like, oh my gosh, have we been really
Funny.
that bad the whole time? So yeah.
That
Do
was
you
funny.
remember? And you remember that
I
lunch?
100% remember. I know who it was, and I remember that lunch.
And I have told that story so many times to people of just there are these moments where you're having the conversation over people, and it's
Yeah.
like, you fix this hole? I'm like, no, we really
Never
don't.
come between two knitters.
We're not that good. Like we said, we said we're not that good to fix that. So I look forward to seeing you next time, hopefully in person.
Yes, I hope so, Carol.
And I wish you so very, very much success. People, this is a joy. And I'm going to recommend this highly to book clubs because this is the kind of book you can go and really have a conversation just like we did on so many different levels.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me.
And to everybody else, we'll see you next time on Book Reporter Talks to.